morning or afternoon or evening, depending on what time zone you're in. I want to extend a very warm welcome from Paris 21 to all those who've joined the call. I see we have over 200 people that have joined so far. My name is Sasha Ramirez. I'm the Communications and Partnerships Manager at Paris 21. This is obviously, it's a crucial topic. It's a timely topic. Today we're looking at addressing COVID-19, how are national statistics offices doing? There couldn't be a topic that's more on everyone's mind at the moment, so we're glad to see that so many people have joined the discussion today. Before I turn things over to Francois Fontenot, my colleague, to get things started, I'll give you a few very brief housekeeping notes. So please keep your microphones muted at all times. That's the panelists, unless you're speaking. Should anybody in the audience wish to ask a question, please do so via the question and answer window. You'll find the Q&A button in your Zoom menu. Simply click the button and then we will try to answer the question during the live segment of the webinar today. But if we're unable to get to it, we will respond in writing afterwards. Those of you who have scheduled interventions will be called on by the moderator, at which point we invite you to unmute yourself and share your video. If anybody has a technical issue getting connected, please send that to us via the Q&A box and a member of our team will reach out to support. So I think that's it for me. With that, I'll turn things over to my colleague, Francois Fontenot, to start the webinar.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues and friends of Paris 21. I do hope that you and your families and your teams are all in good health. I hope you managed to adjust to work your work and lives in these challenging times with the COVID-19 affecting all of us. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this webinar, which is part of our Paris 21 annual meetings. So our topic today is to discuss how the COVID-19 crisis is impacting national statistical offices in low and middle income countries. We will hear in a moment from first-hand perspectives from Juan Daniel Oviedo from Colombia, from Shauda Aishat from the Maldives, from Maleloa Selina Molato from Lesotho, and Emily Posket from the UK. So we are really connecting the 4 continents here, and we hope that technology will be on our side. I wanted to thank very much our 4 panelists for taking the time to be with us. So very briefly, why are we Paris 21 doing this now? So in Paris 21, we believe that the crisis requires strong NSOs. Capacity is needed. So we see many NSOs stepping up with amazing solutions and services. We see others struggling. So this is a time for innovation and peer learning. What we see so far is 2 effects of the pandemic, which are squeezing the capacity of NSOs on the supply and the demand sides. So on the supply side, we see that NSOs are struggling to do their normal business. Many surveys and censuses are on hold, for instance. Staff are working remote with sometimes difficult internet connection. On the demand side, policymakers and the public at large want more timely, more granular data. Different data producers, both public, private, report all types of numbers, projections on a daily basis. And this proliferation of data, if I may, is at times contradictory and can also confuse data users and mistrust in data. We can see it quite often. Yesterday, we had our board meeting and we heard from Stefan Schweinfest, the director of the Statistics Division of the United Nations, who was saying this is very much a data moment. And indeed, while the crisis brings a lot of hardship and challenges, the crisis also has brought data very much central stage. So the crisis also forces us to do different things today, to do things in a different manner. And that's particularly true for NSOs and for us doing capacity development. We do our small share here in Paris 21 by connecting the community and promoting peer learning. We are releasing today our policy brief on the topic to show how national statistical systems what are they doing to fight this battle against COVID-19. Finally, I would like to point you to the work of many of our partners, which are doing very good stuff in responding to this crisis. In particular, I would like to point you to the online resources made available by the UN Statistics Division and the OECD in particular. So with this short introduction, I thank you again, all of you, for joining, and thank the four panelists. And I would like to give the floor to my colleague Salma to kick the discussions and introduce our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, François. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. This is Salma Dair, and I am a policy analyst for Paris 21. I am very pleased to welcome all of you. I see that we are 311 right now. So I am delighted to introduce you to our speakers. First of all, Mr. Juan Daniel Oviedo, who is the Chief Statistician of DANE, the National Statistical Office of Colombia. Also with us today, Mrs. Shahuda Aishat, who is the Chief Statistician of the National Statistical Bureau of the Maldives. I am also glad to have today Mrs. Maleloa Selina Mulato, who's the Director of the Bureau of Statistics of Lesotho. And finally, Mrs. Emily Posket, who's the Head of International Development of ONS, the Office of National Statistics of the United Kingdom. So I would like to turn to our panelists and ask my first question to the four of you. How has COVID-19 been affecting your regular activities, and how have you responded? First, I will give the floor to Mr. Oviedo from DANE, Colombia.
Thank you very much, Salma and François, for the invitation and for sharing this panel, which is a very important opportunity for statistical offices to share our concerns about the challenges that we are facing as regards as COVID-19. More particularly, what we believe is that this current situation is affecting both, let's say, operational dimensions of our statistics office, let's say, what matters with collecting information, the way we collect information, but also it's affecting some conceptual frameworks that we have in order to understand some statistics, more importantly, labor statistics. But at the same time, it's placing some technological challenges because we have to allow the operation of, let's say, about the 97% of the operation of the statistical office to be at home. So we need a technological capability, which is very, very important in order to have a sound, let's say, a remote work for all the personnel and the people that work at DANE. And also it places some data challenges as regards as everybody is trying to ask many questions. For example, in Colombia, we have a very important participation of informal labor activities. And informal labor activities are a little bit invisible for the regulation and for the public policy in our country. And the main concern that we have in our country right now is that if we have 70 or 60% of the population under informality, how are we going to support the conditions that they are facing in this situation of staying at home and not being able to be at the street or on the day-to-day basis in their main labor activities. So that's been very challenging. And I would like to go to the next slide in order to answer the questions that Salma asked to us. I don't know if somebody's helping me. Okay. So from the methodological challenges, our main concern goes to being able to as far as possible, to keep the timetables of our publications in the pre-established calendars. In this world of uncertainty that we are facing right now, statistical offices, we have a very, let's say, soft responsibility is trying to provide information in a regular basis, as it was happening before the COVID-19 current situation. At the other side of the picture, we need to find some new ways of collecting information. For example, in Colombia, the urban household survey had to move towards the telephonic platform. And this is something which, from the social norms that we have in Colombia, places a very important challenge, because we have a little bit of untrust of sharing our private information by telephone. So that's why we needed not only to train our staff to be able and to provide confidence in the conversation that they are going to have by telephone with the household, but also at the same time, we needed to improve our strategic communications framework and to be at the national TV explaining why it's important for the households to answer the telephonic survey. At the other hand, we are facing a challenge for some other statistical operations. How are we going to gather information through fieldwork operations? And there, I think that this current situation, which is very difficult, because I from the personal point of view, they have been the craziest 3 weeks that I have enjoyed in this position at the National Statistical Offices. But creativity in the current situation is very important to be, let's say, a seed for innovation from the way that we produce and to gather information as a National Statistical Office. And when we see that we have to gather information through fieldwork operations, which are restricted, we need to be very conscious that the statistical offices, we have two sides mainly. We have a technical and very rigorous side, which is conceptual, which is methodological, and which is, let's say, a very, very intellectual, as we were at university, for example. But on the other side, we are like a logistics company, and that we have to optimize the process of collecting information in a very important way. And we need to be relevant to the context, the socioeconomic context that we are facing. And there, the difficulties in order to gather information through fieldwork operations played an important role of innovating and developing some interoperability frameworks with administrative records in order to improve the quality of the traditional information that we collected in traditional ways. And at the other hand, as all the country, let's say the government at the national level, but also the subnational level, they are facing tons of questions. So who is the people that we are going to help? What are the main requirements that those families need to be satisfied in the current situation when they are completely isolated at their dwellings, for example? And this high level of disaggregated information has been a very strategic opportunity for Colombia and the National Statistics Office to show the importance of setting very sound statistical operations as housing and population censuses, household surveys, and living standard surveys, because in the current situations, we've been able to put all our information together in order to serve, let's say, some emergency decisions of the government and to support some emergency decisions that the government has been taking the last 3 weeks, for example, to develop an unconditional cash transfer program that is going to help, let's say, poor and vulnerable people in all the country, and it amounts to 3 million households of the 14.3 million households that we managed to count on the last population census. And the interaction between databases of these targeting or conditional transfer programs with the population census has managed to identify who is the people that is not part of conditional cash transfer programs that would need some financial support during the current situation. So this higher level of disaggregated information has allowed us also to show the Colombian society that the information that lies and that we manage with a very rigorous and confidential approach could be very useful in these emergency situations. And if we go to the next slide, this has placed an important challenge in the interaction of the traditional sources of information that we produce as housing and population census, household surveys, and living standard surveys with some health records and some labor market records that we managed to integrate in order to answer many questions. For example, the vulnerability of contagion that the population would have depending on the fact if they live in overcrowded households, if they live in intergenerational households. So if you could go to the next slide, please. The next one, please. Okay, so we managed to interact the information of the population census with some health records in order to do something that we, for example, are showing as an example here in an important city of Colombia, in crossing the information of the population and how the housing and population census of people aged 65 years or over, multi-generational households or households under which children and elder people are living together, and some housing overcrowding status with the national health system records under which we had the population with pre-existing chronic pathologies. We managed to develop some maps at the street block level that are showing for the, let's say, subnational authorities, how is distributed geographically the risk of contagion on some households in this specific city, and they are being able to target in those high red areas, to target some social programs and to target some, let's say, discipline programs for people being completely isolated at their household, because we have also a very social norm that people hates staying at home and they want to be at the street. And this is something from the cultural level that places a restriction for all the sanitation measures that we are developing in our country. And that's why we are very proud that disaggregation of information and the fact that we managed to integrate the traditional sources with administrative records of our census of households has allowed us to provide very important and sound answers to the situation that we are facing right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Oviedo. Let's now hear from Mrs. Aishat from NSB Maldives.
Hello. Actually, in the case of Maldives, since the 19th of March, the government offices has been closed, and now we are trying to work from home. and trying to like has already identified, we are also trying to work from home. So it's mostly like we are using our computers that we have the laptops. So like it's not a cloud or anything that we are using right now because it was very sudden, the government closure thing. So we are also trying to stick to the regular schedules. We have already released the consumer price index, the monthly data, our monthly statistics, and now we are working on quarterly national accounts. So there are some delays actually that are because we have to get a lot of indicators from other government agencies and many private sector also. For the CPI, it's the like now we have almost completely changed to the phone surveys. So from the different locations that we are collecting the prices, staff are working from their homes. So they are like very few instances they try to like drop in, pick up the forms. But other than that, it's just like completely phone calls. So we are somehow managing this process, but 1 day delay in the CPI, and then like right now we have already collected the data for this March. And then because of the in the Maldives, like we are very using the phones a lot, so and the internet connectivity is good. So I think we are fortunate in trying to like coordinate the work we have among our staff. So regularly we can have like meetings. So like the section heads, they have their own meetings, so we can follow up on what is going on. And that way, I think we are managing so far because like at the initial time, the government offices were closed till like towards the end of March, but then again it is extended. So we don't know how it is going to be. So if we still have to go to office at some times because it's not complete lockdown in the Maldives. So I think so far we are progressing. I would say like given the situation, we are okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Aishat. I think, well, okay. So I would like now to give the floor to Mrs. Posket to know how ONS is doing and hearing their feedback from the ONS partner countries in Africa.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon from the UK. And as you said, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll speak a little bit about what ONS is doing in the UK, and I'll speak a little bit about what I have gleaned so far from conversations that I've had with partners in different parts of the world. So as others have mentioned, the crisis has brought a number of kind of parallel and overlapping challenges. Firstly, the suspension of face-to-face interviewing in the UK is a huge challenge for the functioning of a national statistical office. Secondly, the high demand for data for policy decisions as part of the response to the crisis. This crisis has really represented a kind of call to arms for the ONS. And there's huge demand from government at all levels and the public at large on the vital information needed to respond to the pandemic. And then thirdly, as others have mentioned, of course, the challenge of us all working from home. I'm here at home, my colleagues are all at home. And not only that, but we have our children at home with us. We also have other caring responsibilities, possibly people are off sick. And so managing both managing the ability to tackle with the other two challenges whilst having a workforce that's dotted around and not working as usual, obviously all adds up together to a very challenging time for the organisation. So in terms of how we've responded, I think the first thing that I'd like to talk about is the way the organisation has responded managerially. So senior management have set up a series of crisis response teams from the very top of the office who are feeding the information to the cabinets and to the decision makers, through to different task teams working on key areas of response. And this has included work on the outputs and on the data collection, but it's also importantly included a task force working on operations. And that group is really spearheading the huge effort that's gone into ensuring that our ICT infrastructure and our HR policies are adapted to enable us to work from home and to manage our other responsibilities that we have at this time of lockdown. Communications internally and externally has both been really crucial to the response. So all of our staff, including me, we get a daily email that tells us about the latest changes within the organisation, the latest government advice, the latest ways that the policies are changing. You know, that includes working arrangements, well-being, and IT solutions, whether we are permitted to use Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever it is. I think the organisational response is really vital to the success of enabling the other parts of the response. And in terms of other areas on which we're working, so firstly, a massive amount of work has gone into reshaping some of the key data collections. We put in place arrangements for price collection. And so price collectors will be now telephoning shops to check on prices and stocks, manually collecting information from the internet where they can find it, as well as we're also using web scrape data to supplement that where needed. We've moved the labour force survey to telephone based and rolled out rapidly an online labour market survey that we'd already piloted previously, and added questions to both to assess the impact of COVID-19 on people's employment and working patterns. We've set up a couple of new surveys, including an opinions and lifestyle survey to monitor public understanding of COVID-19 and behaviour change and impact on household finances, and a new business impact of coronavirus survey covering business turnover, workforce, producer prices and trade. Other surveys are continuing as telephone based, but maybe cut down to a smaller set of core questions. We're also working on rapid analytical work. There's a new COVID outputs group which meet regularly, and they're responsible for coordinating with other parts of UK government, identifying the analytical pieces that will help support the response and helping to prioritise other analytical products and advise on how to communicate changes to data collection to the users. ONS has launched a new webpage dedicated to explaining the impact of COVID-19 on statistical production and to providing easy access to the latest analysis. And I'd encourage you all to take a look at that. In terms of analytical work, we started with short, kind of simple analysis of existing data. So producing demographic analysis, for example, where vulnerable groups might be. I was very impressed with Dane's map. We have some similar maps, but they're simpler, just showing numbers of population of different age groups and things. We've produced new analytical products using existing information about the labour force and self-employment, roles of carers, social relationships, support networks available for vulnerable groups, etc. We've also been recrafting existing publications to put a focus on COVID. So our regular publication, Weekly Deaths, has been extremely high profile during this crisis. Yesterday's data was discussed in the regular Prime Minister's press conference by the ministers, not the Prime Minister, who sadly is unwell, yesterday, and has become kind of the most visited piece of work on the ONS website. And this shows estimates of all deaths, not just those that occur in hospital, which are the more rapidly available information from the Department of Health. We're also planning more new and more complicated analysis, and that we've launched a new publication, Coronavirus, UK Economy and Society, Faster Indicators, which contains new data and experimental indicators looking at changes on economy and society in the short run. And we've produced guidance for people from across the government, statisticians from across UK government in producing urgent pieces of ad hoc statistical analysis and kind of guidance on how to ensure that those meet quality standards. And then finally, I'll talk a tiny bit about how we're using data science to support decision making during the pandemic. So we're highly privileged to have a dedicated data science campus who can experiment with new tools and data to support the work of ONS. And this resource has been quickly deployed to work on the challenges posed by the COVID-19. They're investigating how new data sources could be used to support decision makers during the pandemic. For example, on assessing the impact of social distancing, identifying the number of people in self-isolation, understanding changes to trading goods, assessing the impact on businesses. The opportunities are huge, and it's important to note that all new projects are still subject to ethical review to ensure that appropriate safeguards are in place. Some examples that I can talk about including using Google community mobility reports, which have been published by Google to show changing levels of people visiting different types of location in 131 countries. The campus has been working on extracting the data from these reports for the UK and other countries and making these available along with the code base used. And the analysis and charts and maps produced has already been used by the government in the UK and is available for people from the other 130 countries to use. We've also been feeding in some of our ongoing work on using shipping data into work being done in the UK and by the UN Statistics Division on producing rapid measures of the impacts of the crisis on international trade. There are various other projects kind of under discussion, and ONS are in discussion with lots of organisations about using data, some of which is kind of still in the early stages, and we're very interested to hear from other people in the discussion about how they've gone about accessing new types of data and using those. So that's kind of whistle-stop tour of all the huge amount of work that's been going on at ONS over the last few weeks. As my role as Head of International Development, I've been in touch with a number of partners around the world. And I would say that the response to the crisis from national statistics officers has been extremely variable. I think the length and the duration and the nature of the crisis is varying enormously from country to country. You know, also the restrictions that are in place are vary enormously from country to country. And as does the NSO's capability to respond. You know, whether you can work remotely, whether you have the ICT infrastructure, the networking capacities to work remotely, whether your government is really placing the high levels of demand on you to produce the analytical products that you could produce. So I think it's extremely variable, but I believe it's a call to arms for all of us. And that in order to deliver an effective response to the crisis, statistical data needs to be collected, analysed and disseminated effectively. We at ONS are undergoing a period of huge transformation. The crisis has pushed us into making tough choices about how to do things differently and make the most of opportunities. And we're learning a huge amount of lessons along the way. Some important legacies from this crisis might include use of new sources and methods, formation of new partnerships, and increased use of data at national and local level. We are happy to share lessons with partners. We have existing partnerships with 3 African NSOs, and we also have a partnership with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. We'll be working with them to support member states where we can with the country-specific problems identified. For example, we've already begun to discuss with partners things like developing working from home policies, internal communication strategies, decisions around censuses, whether to delay censuses planned in the next year or so, plans for new survey instruments to monitor socioeconomic impacts of the crisis, options for collecting prices data, which I think is really, really important to continue, and other continuous data collections and to reduce face-to-face contact. New forms of analysis that are possible, applying some of the data science solutions that we're working on in the UK to solve challenges in partner countries, and delivery of remote training, for example, on data visualization or on the use of some of these new tools. We have to also be conscious that the crisis does not negate the need to invest in core data systems. Some data collections, such as censuses or surveys, big surveys, might need to be delayed, and alternative sources might be used to respond in the short run, but in the long run, these data collections are going to be essential to support the recovery phase, and we must continue to work on planning for those as best as we can remotely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bosquet. And now I would like to hear Mrs. Molato and the Lesotho experience. So I know that you had some connection problems. If you could unmute yourself and maybe tell us, please, how has COVID-19 been affecting your regular activities and how have you responded?
Okay, thank you very much, Salma, and good morning to everyone. Here in Lesotho, the Prime Minister, as a result of COVID-19, announced a lockdown from the 30th March to the 21st April 2020. As a result, all data collection activities had to be put on hold. That we all do throughout the year, whether regular or the complex surveys, including censuses. This is because all business were ordered to close and movement of people restricted. So you might be reminded that as an NSO, we run surveys, complex and regular, as I've said, and we collect data from businesses and households. We still follow the old traditional way of visiting households, doing face-to-face data interviewing, and going to shops, taking prices, and then also calling the manufacturers on industrial statistics, emailing them, sending the questionnaires, and therefore they would reply. So what is happening at the moment is that most of our all of our regular surveys have been affected. We are not doing them at all. For instance, the CPI that we collect every month, the first 2 weeks of every month, we go out to all outlets that are selected to collect the data. But at the moment, that was put on hold because now most of these shops that are in our sample size have been closed, except for a few on food, which we are making other arrangements to see how we can access their data without having to go and pick the prices as we usually do. Now, the other surveys that are mostly affected, one survey that is mostly affected is our annual continuous household survey. This is a platform that runs statistics to collect data on core questions of the labor market statistics as well as consumption, and including the other modules of interest. And this year we had included a detailed module on GPS, which is governance, peace and security, and the other very detailed was on the labor force. So that means we had only, because it started in February and it was expected to run for 12 months. So that means the last day of data collection was the 30th before the lockdown started, because the lockdown was supposed to commence at noon. And that means since April now, we are not visiting the households that were supposed to be visited at this time. So this means now this data collection is going to suffer. Now, the going forward, I don't know whether I should stop here, Salma. What are you saying? Should I continue until I get to our future plans on if the lockdown continues, or even if it comes to a stop on the indicated date?
We
Hello?
can talk about this a little bit later to leave some
Okay.
suspense. Thank you.
Okay, so these are some of the surveys then that are affected. The other main, very complex survey that we were planning to do this year was the 2019-2020 Aquaculture Census. The plan, according to the, our plan was to go to the field for the main data collection in October. So that means the census activities such as the pilots and others were supposed to start in April. So because of this, we don't see that happening. So we'll wait until a further announcement is made to see how we can reschedule these activities so that we also come up with a new date for the main data collection. I think as for the others, like the GDP, the quarterly GDP, where end of March, we were working on the fourth quarter 2019 quarterly accounts. So that one is being released. I think it's the only one that would be released. These other ones are annual, so they will continue later depending on whether the lockdown continues or not. And I think, yes, that is about all, because I have talked about the economic statistics, which is CPI and GDP, wholesale and retail and industrial. And on social, I think most of them are being collected on annual. This is education, health, crime, and non-agriculture. It is the annual agriculture production. It is also the horticulture that we do on quarterly basis, which also has been put to a halt because we can't go to people's farms on fruits and vegetables at this time. We are not allowed to move. I think this is what I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Morato, and thanks to everyone for updating us on the short-term impact and mitigation strategies. We now know that the situation changes by the day and that it's very difficult to make the projections ahead. But I would like to ask first Mr. Oviedo, looking forward, what are the midterm and long-term problematics for DANE? Do you see this crisis as accelerating some trends for the role of official statistics? Over to you.
Thank you, Salma, for that question, because it's something that I would like to take as an opportunity to highlight about the topics of the last two meetings that Paris 21 has held in Paris. The first one in October was related to building trust. And one of the more important challenges in this moment and in the post-COVID situation is that people need information to be trusted and to be of high quality and highly disaggregated and relevant and close to the way they live and close to the problems they face. And that's why, as probably you, Salma, and François have seen it in our intervention in Paris in October, one of the main roles that or challenges that we have right now is that the independence of the statistical offices is not isolation anymore. That we need, for example, as the debate of university autonomy, that we need to develop some important sets of governance, accountability, and effectiveness in order to build trust from society to the official statistics that we produce. And this accountability and effectiveness brings me to the session that we had in Paris at the beginning of January, when we were studying the capacity 4.0 model that Paris 21 was developing in order to how statistical offices are going to integrate alternative sources of information in order to allow or to improve the availability of relevant statistics, and in order to see how as we are not a monopoly anymore, how are we going to develop a set from the institutional level and from the technological level that would allow us to become data stewards in our societies, and how are we going to make the official statistics production to be relevant, to be sound, to the new socioeconomic challenges that we are going to face in the post-COVID area. For example, the new ways of work, the new ways of social interaction that we are going to face, and the vulnerability in a country as Colombia that has a very important gender inequalities and at the same time socioeconomic inequalities. As a matter of example of this moment of creativity that we are facing right now, that is going to pave the road, let's say, of Danny becoming a data steward in Colombia, is, for example, this visualization platform under which you see, for example, Bogota, but let's say fastly we go to a village which is famous from the international point of view, which is Cartagena. And here you are seeing the street block level distribution of Cartagena as regards as the multidimensional poverty index that we managed to build in the population and housing census 2018, and the integration with new administrative records and new sources of information from governmental agencies that are playing an important role in facing or solving the inequality challenges that we have in our country. But we fastly integrating this information with the health record, we managed to develop a new platform, which is the vulnerability risk that I was mentioning in my first intervention, that we are having in Cartagena at the block level, taking into account the risk of contagion of the COVID-19 pandemic that we have right now. So this was something that I wanted to illustrate as a way that this moment is going to be a transformational moment for statistical offices in order to be relevant, to be open to new sources of information, but at the same time, to be ethical and to manage the ethical concerns of the new ways of interaction of our society in the forthcoming years. Thank you very much, Salma.
Thank you, Mr. Oviedo. I would like now to ask Mrs. Aishat from the Maldives, what are the possible lessons learned that COVID-19 taught us in terms of coordination and crisis management?
Thank you. Actually, at the NBS, we are working very closely with the UN agencies and other government partners, because there are a lot of many initiatives on doing rapid assessments here on like the tourism sector in the country. Actually, it has been affected a lot because we are very much dependent on the tourism. So with the resorts closure, like the employment, people are losing their jobs. So there's like a lot of chaos going on, and people are very concerned about this job security. And even in the resorts, there are a lot of foreign workers. So the economic ministry and like there's going to be this livelihood assessment that is planned, and from the NBS now we are trying to do this employee interviews, like when this like pandemic hit, actually we were in the midst of the household income and expenditure survey. So I forgot to mention it earlier. So actually we have stopped the survey for now, but it is not complete. So now we are trying to work with other agencies because in addition to these rapid assessments, like there are other international agencies like the World Bank and like UN Women, like they also have their own like regional rapid assessments. So these things are also going to happen soon. And now we are trying to come up with the assessment like the small and medium enterprises. So this like administrative data is being assessed. So like we are part of all this, NBS is in the midst of all these things. So the demand for this COVID related assessments has actually, it's very high right now. So it's like working from home, it's like apart from the regular activities, there's a lot of, everybody wants data. So we feel that this is a very good opportunity that like in our case, we don't have a labor force survey right now, but the household income and expenditure survey has like labor module that we integrated together with the ILO last time. So we are trying to see like this, take this as an opportunity to try and introduce a labor market assessment, like a labor force survey. But because of the funding difficulties, like the budget has been cut, so that's why we are unable to like do many surveys on our own. So there's going to be this new initiative to do this using like KT. We are already working on like computer assisted like phone, Catty. So that is one setup that we are trying to like initiate. So there's this new data demands and working with the other agencies, like we are also trying to pilot some like vulnerability mapping. But because we don't have good geospatial information systems right now, the census data, the latest frame we have is for 2014 census. So like in the other countries' experience, we still need to develop these new geographic information systems and integrate it with the statistics. So for that, we are working on the trying to do this mapping work for the census. So this the plans for the new like major exercises like the censuses is we don't want to stop it, like, but we want to take it as an opportunity to try and look at this geographic information system to look at the vulnerable population. So like the gender ministry, they are trying to address, they have lists of people like who are like this, like in the disability register, the social protection, like the vulnerable children. So they want to do some mapping. So there are some like many data collection efforts that people want to do, but at this time we are like, it's not a very good time to do a big phone survey or something like that. Yeah? So at the time, there's plans for joint assessment. The UN country team is working together and with other international agencies also. So like we are discussing even today on the methodology, like what is a good methodology to do right now? Like going for a major household survey when like when you cannot go and interview face to face, so like it might not be effective. So like this, what is a good methodology to use? Like, is it a rapid assessment that we should do right now and try to do some critical emerging issues, and then we try to plan a longer term survey. So there's these types of discussions at the international with like UN country team and the relevant agencies. We are working remotely also. So there are some sort, the committees are formed. So we have discussions on these things and try to, so very soon we are planning to implement this like a little bit later this month. So some of these things have actually not been final yet, but there are going to be assessments and there has to be some plans. And what NBS role is like, we try to coordinate this in such a way that like the household's burden will be like less. And if so many people are like wanting information and going to the houses, we want to make sure that like people can identify like this is coming from the National Bureau of Statistics. So this phone setup is something that we want to do for the first time. I mean, as a like some unique line that is coming from the like NBS operators. So these setups are being right now almost complete, but some of the information, like the data demands are very high, especially for this, how to deal with this impact and how to measure this. Like government is trying to like ask people to register in the like economic ministry if they lose their jobs. People are having difficulties in paying this rent. So there are all these things that we need to capture. So we are planning to design this questionnaire and together with all the data needs to come up with a small questionnaire that we can and decide on a methodology how to go about this. What we do right now over the phone or what we do long term in the at the household level. Right now, what is being done is mostly on the firm level. Together with UNDP, there's like how the micro, small and medium enterprises are being hit. For that, there's some data collection already ongoing. And the associations like the guest house associations, and they are already doing their own assessments on their what is the tourism employees association. So there are some assessments that are already ongoing. So the effort now is to coordinate all these things and to try and come up with like some output on what actually is the impact right now. So that is actually what we are planning on this assessment side.
Thank you, Mrs. Aishat. Turning now to Mrs. Molato, I'd like to know what is Lesotho's take working with other data providers like mobile phone companies at times when data collection through survey is difficult, and also maybe some long-term takeaways that you would have. Mrs. Molato, could you unmute yourself?
Sorry. Yes, thank you. Yes, the Bureau of Statistics, Lesotho, as you know, it is a coordinator of the entire national statistics system. So we work with the line ministries, we work with all the data providers. But what we have realized, I think 2 years ago when we had a project funded by the EU and the UNDP, where we were supposed to work on our developing the systems within the NSOs, is that we should really make sure that we work with the line ministries and other relevant departments to process the data that are hosted by these institutions, to see if that could complement whatever data we have from surveys, and maybe eventually would end up not having to go to the field to collect some of the data, or maybe we'll just go there for a few surveys. So this is what we've been doing. We had started with the small funding that we had with the two ministries of the police and law and the defense and correctional services. We try to help them, first of all, look at design their indicators, relevant indicators for those sectors, and thereafter look at what data would be needed for those indicators. It was especially for the implementation or monitoring of our national strategic plan, and also the SDGs and other agenda that we know. So we did that. We also, we taught them how to process the data and how to manage it, how to store it, how to write reports, do all analysis and all of that. And also we worked with them to develop metadata. of all their indicators. So we did that in 2 ministries and we saw that was working. So we were thinking this year before this pandemic came to see how our resources would permit us to work with other 2 ministries that would identify 2 or 3 depending on the availability of the resources. So this was sorry, this was in our plan to start small like that and continue until we cover all ministries that have data in manual forms. Sorry. However, I should point out that there are other ministries that have good systems, such as the Home Affairs, where now people register for their identifications and all that. Their system is good and we have access to that. And this is some of the data we can use in times like these to make some estimates that might be required. But we have a long way with these other ministries or data providers or other institutions that have data in manual forms of records, where now in trying to assist them, we have to train them, we have to provide some equipment for them, and all of that. As you may know, that most of the ministries do not have budgets for statistics. So this is how we do work with them. Now, we also have a committee that comprise all these, all the ministries, line departments, and the private sector, including the special groups such as the youth and representatives of the people living with disabilities, all of that. And we plan, we meet 4 times a year to see what data requirements we have as a country and who can provide what and who can provide what. So we work together like that. And we also work with development partners. Some of them do have some initiatives of data collection for their programs. And UNDP especially, they have an initiative where they collect data on social media, for some of their indicators. And this is where we were thinking we could take advantage and see whether we can attach a few questions and then later get some information for our purpose, for us to, provide official statistics. So this is how we partner. We work together like that with everyone in the country, providers, users, and all of them to provide data. But now, I think we have learned that more than yesterday, we have to start now to exploit some of these initiatives that I've talked about to see whether we could get, we could avail data from non-traditional methods. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Marato. Before the Q&A, I'd like to give the floor now to Mrs. Pasquet. Could you please tell us how do you see this crisis changing the way we do international cooperation? I know it's a big question, but yeah, thanks.
Well, so I think we're all learning a lot at the moment about working remotely, which I think can only be a positive thing in terms of international cooperation. So we've got new tools, new communication channels, new kind of cultures that make it more normal to do this kind of thing. And I think that can increase the diversity of voices in international meetings and international discussions like this without necessarily travel previously required. So I think that's a good thing. I think ONS and many other organisations are moving more resources online. We've now got a lot of online training becoming available and offering online training as standard, and we'll be able to tap into some of these facilities for the long run as well as during the crisis. I think, you know, like I've previously said, we're moving rapidly into using new sources, methods and ways of working, and I think the crisis itself will open up some opportunities around modernisation, which you know, we can build upon in the longer run. You know, I think we've already identified some immediate lessons, and I'm sure there will be many more. I think you know, a lot of us are working on tools and products that could potentially be lifted and shifted to other contexts, and we can use our networks to be able to take advantage of that and not reinvent wheels. But it's all very challenging remotely, and we have to make sure that we take into account local contexts. And you know, we're working very hard, and particularly in our data science work, on making any tools that are produced and codes that are produced shareable and available to other partners to take advantage of. But as always, we need to keep an eye on the context and make sure that that any sharing of technical work goes hand in hand with conversations about operational, managerial capability and contextual issues as well. But you know, I think, as I've said before, I think this crisis is a call to arms for all of us, and I think by working together we can make the most out of the situation as we can. Thank you. Thank you,
Ms. Basket. So now it's time for our Q&A. Thank you to all our panelists, but we're not done. I see that there's a lot of interesting questions. So let me begin by one from UNECA, from Mr. Oliver Shingania to Mrs. Shahuda. For the CPI, are you collecting for all items in the basket or selected items? So I give the floor to you.
Thank you. Actually, right now, we can collect for all the items. So because the shops are yet not closed, so like we have connections, like phone numbers that we collected before the closure. So we are trying to collect everything possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you. From FAO, from Mr. Jairo Castaño to Mr. Oviedo. Beside CATI, Cathy, has Dane tried to use CAWI, which is computer-assisted web interviewing? So giving the floor to Mr. Oviedo.
Yeah, thank you, Salma. Thank you for the interesting question. We have tried to use CAWI methodologies for the housing and population census. And in that statistical operation, we managed to account, let's say, 10% of the population that introduced or complied the information of the housing and population census through CAWI platform. But the issue is that the internet coverage and penetration in households in Colombia is highly unequal. At this moment, we have an internet penetration rate of 47% of households in our country, but this 47% amounts to the, let's say, top 5 cities: Bogota, Cali, Medellin, Cartagena, and Barranquilla. And the rest of the country, we still have a very unequal distribution of internet penetration, and that's why we cannot universalize or to broaden the scope of the CAW methodologies. That's why even, for example, as an important issue, in the rural section of the household survey, the labor market survey, the continuous household survey, we did not manage to do it by telephone, yeah, because this is also an issue of comprehension and the social norms of interaction by telephone in Colombia. We have a barrier to have these, let's say, technical conversations, which amounts to a household survey related to the labor market in the rural areas. That's why we are providing sanitation protection to all our staff that is in the rural section of our country in order to still or keep the face-to-face interview for the household survey. That's why the main innovation that we are doing is to do the household survey by telephone. And from the methodological perspective, it implies a lot of biases. That's why we are working very closely with the ECLAC and with the International Labour Organization in order to see how, even when we hopefully expect the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are going to keep a subsample of the household survey with the telephone grasping of information in order to identify in the post-COVID-19 the bias that implies the telephonic capture of the information, and at the same time to contribute and to evaluate if we don't have a lot of bias and it's an optimal way of grasping this information, why not we innovate and move to CAWI or CATLIN platforms to gather the information of the household survey. That's the main issue that I wanted to address to answer the question. Thank you, Salma.
Thank you, Juan Daniel. So I have a question for Mrs. Molato from Mrs. Otili Mwazi, the Deputy Statistician General of Namibia Statistics Agency. She's asking, please share your country experience on calling and emailing suppliers on data collection approach. How are the responses? Namibia wants to use the same approach. If you could unmute your mic, please. Thanks. Great.
Well, it has its own challenges, but it's a good way of collecting data. We do that for the industrial statistics. We use the emails. We use the telephone numbers. We also have given them tablets, some of them, so they just fill the questionnaires themselves and then send back to us. So it's a very useful and effective way of data collection. You can try it, but it does has its own challenges, just like any other survey. Even this face-to-face survey, approaches has their own limitations. But please try it, because we now realize that I think it's a lesson from this COVID-19 that if we had all the telephones for all our master frames, be it the household master frame, be it the business frame, if we had all identification, including emails and telephone for all units of businesses and all households, we wouldn't have been having too many challenges as we do have now. So this is a lesson that we are carrying forward. And so I would advise you to start implementing it, and the challenges, we will discuss them later as you see them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Morato. Since we're running a little bit over time, just wanted to say thank you to the audience. That we're still 250. We're still continuing to receive questions, and we will have some closing remarks shortly. So next question will be for Mrs. Posket from INSEE, the French NSO. It's from Mr. Yann Robert Sousser. Emily, please, could you give more details on how your publication on weekly deaths has changed since the beginning of the crisis? Was there already a publication by ONS on these weekly deaths before or less frequent?
Thank you. Yes, it was already a weekly publication. And like I said before, it's adding in the deaths that are registered in the community to the deaths that occur in hospitals, which is published more rapidly by the Ministry of Health. So it's already a regular ongoing publication, and all that's changed is a kind of additional focus on the deaths that have an association with COVID-19 alongside them, and a lot more public interest in the original publication. So yeah, those are the main changes.
Thank you. Maybe a little bit more broad question from Walter Radermacher. So he says, I haven't heard the SDGs mentioned until now. Isn't it true that this great social maneuver will have to be mastered by us when we hopefully have overcome the current crisis? Isn't it necessary to prepare the statistical system for it now and not just to ensure the traditional work? So this is a question, open question. Maybe I could address it to Mrs. Aishat Sushahuda.
Thank you. Actually, when this COVID pandemic occurred, and then we actually were already working on integrating the SDGs into our strategic action plan that the government has, and trying to identify indicators. So I think in the SDGs, like the poverty, the social protection, the education, so there are all these new ways of working. So we have to try and integrate more means in statistical plans that we have. And in the case of Maldives, we are working on the national strategy for development of statistics from 2020 to 2030. So we are supposed to launch it this year. So right now we are preparing, trying to identify what are the core areas that we should focus on in the plan. So at this time, we feel that the employment area, because we don't have this good system to monitor this, there has to be some activities that is going to generate data for the SDGs, and also for the education, there's going to be online, all the students, schools are closed, universities are closed. So how this online, what is the ICT friendly? So there are so many indicators already in the SDGs that I think we need to prioritize and start producing the data for. So even in case of health, how we are addressing these issues, in the case of Maldives, fortunately, we don't have any deaths so far. It's the health system is very much active on but there are not if there's an outbreak, how we are going to cater for this, so the health system also, they are changing the way they work, so I think the SDGs definitely, it is we have to emphasize more on some of these identification of social protection flows in the country, and some of these indicators, also the environmental work that now I think with this crisis, maybe again we need to, there are a lot of things that need to be done differently. Yeah. So SDGs different already are always I think in the background. So I think some of the areas like poverty, inequality, employment, so these things need to be even more focused in our new plans, and how we address once we are the health pandemic part actually is we are able to deal with it, and that's what I feel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now to Mr. Oviedo, I have a question from Mr. Byron Villasis. The crisis obligates to make methodological decisions ex post. What steps Colombia is taking to justify, argument, and in general establish the transparency policy about these decisions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I understand very well that all these methodological decisions imply several risks of biases, or let's say the continuity of the information that we produce. And that's why at the same time, we've been working very hard at the, let's say, methodological perspective in order to take advantage of something which is very important, and I would like to highlight, is that right now, national statistical offices, we have to value and we have to highly value the existence of all these international networks of support or the international statistical community, because together we are going to have these methodological scenarios in order to be robust, in order to be relevant, and in order to guarantee that the methodological biases that we are going to face as regards us changing the way we grasp or collect information do not affect the effects or the impacts of the COVID-19 from the socioeconomic perspective in labor, inflation, or poverty or inequality in our society. So in order to answer the questions that Byron posed, we believe that the methodological perspective of the challenges we are facing is very serious, and we have to be transparent, and at the same time, we have to be very rigorous in order to evaluate all possible impacts of these methodological changes that they are going to play in the quality frameworks of our statistics. And we have to be accountable, and we have to explain to the users and to the population that we are facing those risks and that we are able to mitigate or to minimize the impact of the biases of the methodological changes that we are facing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Daniel. I have a question for Mrs. Pasquet from Laura Fadila, who's asking, if we use administrative data and perhaps big data to complete the quarterly trade sector data, wholesale and retail, to support GDP quarter one, how to integrate both data that were collected from face-to-face and administrative data?
I'm afraid I'm probably not the best person to answer that.
A bit technical.
I mean, in general, across all the publications, we're looking at integrating a range of data sources and in communicating quite clearly with the users about the implications of those. And I think that's a really, I noticed there's a couple of questions about how to communicate with users about potential disruptions and lack of continuity in data series. And I think, what we're doing is we're trying to put out there in advance of other publications using all sorts of tools, including articles and even webinars, to explain some of the differences in how we're applying those changes. And I really liked the comment from Colombia about trying to estimate the impact of changes after the event where possible. So I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to your particular question, but I think where we're trying to try new data sources and integrate new data sources, the key thing is transparency and communicating appropriately.
Thank you. It's okay, I have another question for you anyway.
Oh, goodness.
It's one from, so the name is Amitava Saha. She's asking, in this time of crisis, we need to compromise in terms of sample size, quantum of information collected, etc., that is likely to have an impact on the quality of the data statistics produced. What kind of measures you're adopting or using to address these concerns of the users with regard to reliability, usefulness of the statistics?
Yeah, so I think that's the question that I touched on a little bit there. And the key is just transparency and openness and being honest about the challenges that we're undergoing and you know, working hard to do the best job that we can and to make sure that the users understand where we've had to compromise and why.
Thank you. So we have a lot of questions, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna have to wrap up. I just wanted to thank all of you, our amazing speakers, but also all the attendees for their questions. So I am giving now the floor to Johannes Jutig, who's Paris 21's executive head, for the concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salma. Hello, everybody. It was really amazing, I have to say. We are still over 200 people listening, and 1.5 hours on a webinar. This is a great achievement. Thanks to all of you for sharing your thoughts, for sharing your practical experiences, how you live with this crisis, and from hearing from different parts of the world is really very interesting. So thank you so much. It's hard, it's close to impossible to summarize such a rich discussion. So what I will do is trying to tease out a few elements that will stick with me and will stick with Paris 21. At the end of the day, this webinar is part of our board meeting. So we will try to make an effort how this links to our work and how we should adapt to this with our partners being the national statistical offices and the donor community. So the first point I wanted to say is clearly, and this is data and science is back. Data and science is back, and I think as Juan Daniel said it very, very clearly, the onus is now on the statistical offices all over the world. They are always asked now, what's going on? Can you give me the data? And this is overall is good news. It's good news in the sense that policymakers are asking for science, for evidence, and then they want to do, most of them at least, informed decision on how to contain this crisis on the one hand. And we will also see in a couple of weeks more, when the lockdown will be over, how to restart the economy. Lots of people are now saying it will be a before Corona and it will be an after Corona. And the things might be very, very different. Other people saying, which I would agree, and I think this also echoes what quite a few of you have said, that the crisis is accelerating existing trends. Example, I think Emily mentioned this, but also many of the other colleagues from Lesotho and from Maldives and what we just heard. Digitalization, modernization of statistical offices. We have been talking this about 15 years now, but now is the time to do it. You have to you sit at home and you have to adjust to new working conditions. Now, there's no time. The other thing is the trend of different working methods and also different ways of partnerships. I think the point of reaching out to other data producers, to reach out to alternative data producers, it's very clear that only with official statistics alone, we can't do the job. We have to get in partnership with other data producers. And many of them, if you go to the main databases of today, the Johns Hopkins Center and those who are played in the media, it's always a mashup of official statistics and new data sources. So I think it's a really call to the arms, I think you said, to do it now. And there's no time to lose. The other point I wanted to make, and you have said it was so critical, is the trust. And this is, I think, the capital that we have. Trusted data. It's not any kind of data, but trusted is so critical. The only point, and you could see that is emerging, which we really need to pay more attention to, is the heterogeneous and the possibilities of different countries to respond. We clearly, and I think there was one question from Agnieszka from the Millennium Development Corporation. It was very clear that some poor countries where there is no internet connection, how can you do telework with no internet connection? How can you do telephone interviews when there's no telephones? I mean, So there are some problems specifically for the poorest countries. And I think that's something Paris 21 is particularly asked for, to look more closer into the responses for those countries who might have not the means to do the things that the more advanced countries can do. It's still great to see, and it's very important to hear the examples like from the Philippines, from Colombia, and from many others, and to see how they can be sort of in South learning, peer review learning, what you can tell to others. But there might be some other countries that maybe at this stage can't join this at this stage. So we need to think very hard what to do about those. I wanted to share a few tools that have come up in the conversation. That were also mentioned yesterday, but there's one is the UNSD website. I saw that there was really very concrete questions on very technical things, also in the amazing chat that I could see on very concrete specific points. And there are examples that you can find if you go to the UNSD website, or the World Bank also, and I know that Haishan Fu, the director, is here, and I saw some of the chats. There are some really good examples that you can find. There's also the OECD that has set up a digital workspace for those of you who are working in statistical offices. So you can sign up. We will send out shortly an email so you can register and you can exchange in a secured environment what to do about this. And then last but not least, I should say, we just at this very moment issued our first policy brief on the crisis. So basically, my colleagues, and kudos to my colleagues who worked basically day and night over the last week to put together a 6-page document that you can find now on our website, summarizing the main results of our investigation. So what have we been doing? I think one thing what I missed in the conversation is a little bit of a stepping back, looking at the analytical framework, stepping back to conceptual framework. How are statistical offices affected? And as we just learned, is two things are important. One is a supply shock, and people can't go to work, you can't do the census, you are constrained with respect to your workforce and many other things. And on the other hand, you have the demand shock, more demand for your data. So in that sense, it's a very nice figure which is capturing these different effects, and it also shows how you eventually can react. And then the policy brief does a very good job in sourcing in first a couple of anecdotal evidence in the sense of what you can do, how countries are adapting, to formulate 3 main messages at the very end of this policy brief. And some of them have been already said. I mean, one was definitely the national statistical offices have to step up and reach out and become in this new data stewardship and sort of relays with others. They also need to change the way of communication. They need to reach out and go to see the government ministers, be there, be present, and be open, and just get those focus on those statistics that these days matter most, and be an honest partner in this. So I think there's lots of things to do. We invite you. We have set up a task force, a rapid task force at Paris 21, which is currently only composed of my team members, a few team members. Since yesterday, we already have a couple of more interests. We invite you all, if you have an interest, to contact us, to be part of this, because I can sense that there is really an interest in the community to discuss this further. We are just at the beginning. The crisis will last longer. It will have a profound effect of how we work all over the place. And I think we really want to invite you to be part of this, and we can do our little contribution at Paris 21. So with this, I really want to come to the end. This webinar has been part of the Paris 21 board meetings. It was the first board meeting completely virtual. So we had yesterday our board meeting. We just had another webinar 1.5 hours ago about the SDG localization, and now we have this webinar. And it works, it works. I mean, I don't know whether the outcome is so different from if you would have seen us in person. I think what we all miss is the personal contact, that's for sure. And some things, and we are depending on technology, and things can go very badly wrong, but overall this time it works amazingly. And that doesn't mean that we will do all these things now virtually. I think we shouldn't say this, but some things can be changed. And I think we will move more to webinars more audio content, and also trying to be more in touch with you guys using those opportunities. And I think many of you, and I think Emily said this already, we have to really rethink hard how we work. So with this, let me just say a few words of thanks. Thanks for all you, still 200 people, to the panelists, to Salma for a wonderful moderation, really very well done. And all over to my colleagues, to my whole team, who has been amazingly working over the last 3-4 weeks to set this up. We didn't know that this was becoming a virtual meeting a month ago. So we had to change everything from a physical meeting to a virtual meeting. And given that we are an international agency, I think it worked pretty well. So thanks so much for all the colleagues spending the time and helping. And yeah, let's stay in touch. I wish you stay healthy. Let's keep this good moment yeah, let's continue the conversation. The meeting is adjourned. Bye-bye.